I was standing in the middle of Terminal 2 at Mexico City International Airport, completely alone with nothing in my pockets, no phone in my hands, and a terrifying realization that my own son had just abandoned me in a foreign country. The airport was a blur of faces and voices in Spanish that I could not understand, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. My son, Trevor, had taken everything from me, and now I was standing in this massive terminal with no way to contact anyone, no money, and no hope. If you have ever felt completely betrayed by the person you love most in this world, if you have ever wondered what you would do when everything is taken from you, then keep watching, because what happens next will change everything. My name is Maurice Kaplan, and I am 67 years old, a retired construction supervisor from the small coal mining town of Ashford, Pennsylvania, where everybody knows everybody else, and betrayal is not supposed to happen to good people like me. I had spent my entire life building things. I built shopping malls and office buildings and apartment complexes all across the state of Pennsylvania. I had worked in the freezing cold of winter and the scorching heat of summer, and I had always come home to my wife Linda and my son Trevor with dirt under my fingernails and pride in my heart. I had never missed a day of work in 38 years. I had never called in sick when I was not really sick. I had never stolen anything or cheated anyone or broken a promise. I was the kind of man who believed in hard work and family and doing things the right way. I was the kind of man who thought that if you treated people with respect and dignity, they would treat you the same way in return. I was the kind of man who was completely naive about how cruel the world could be. Linda had died 3 years ago from cancer, and the grief had nearly destroyed me. We had been married for 41 years, and she was my best friend, my partner, my reason for getting up in the morning. Without her, I felt like a building with all its support beams removed. I moved through each day like I was underwater, going through the motions but not really living. I retired from my job 6 months after she died because I could not concentrate on work anymore. I could not focus on anything except the emptiness of our house in Ashford and the silence that filled every room. Trevor had noticed my depression, or at least he had said he did. He had called me one afternoon in early April and said, "Dad, I think you need to get away. You need to see something beautiful. You need to remember that life is still worth living." He had suggested a trip to Mexico, a father and son adventure that he had apparently been thinking about for a long time. He said that he had already looked into the flights and hotels, and that he wanted to pay for the whole trip as a gift to me. At the time, I thought my son was showing me love. I thought he was showing me that he cared about my well-being. I thought that finally, after all these years of being a provider and a protector, someone was taking care of me. How wrong I was. How absolutely, catastrophically wrong I was about everything. Trevor had picked me up at my house in Ashford 2 weeks ago, and we had driven to the Pittsburgh International Airport. He had been unusually quiet on the drive, and now I realized he was probably rehearsing his plan in his mind, making sure every detail was perfect. He had checked both of our bags, but he had told me that I should go to the bathroom while he handled the luggage. When I came back, he told me that he had checked my bag through to Mexico City and that he had transferred my wallet and credit cards to his carry-on bag for safekeeping. I thought this was thoughtful. I thought this showed that he was responsible and careful. I did not understand that he was stealing from me. We had landed in Mexico City 3 days ago, and we had stayed at a luxury hotel that Trevor had booked in a neighborhood called Polanco. The hotel was beautiful, with marble floors and a view of the city from our suite. We had eaten at expensive restaurants and taken tours of the city and gone to museums. Trevor had been the perfect travel companion, attentive and funny and interested in my thoughts and my feelings. We had talked about Linda and about my life and about my regrets, and Trevor had seemed genuinely concerned about my happiness. I had felt like maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a chapter where my son was my companion and my friend. But yesterday morning, everything changed. Trevor had suggested that we go to different parts of the city for the day and meet up at the airport in the evening to catch our flight back to the United States. I thought this was strange, but he convinced me that we should separate. He had given me a map and some walking directions, and I had spent the day visiting churches and markets and parks. When I returned to the airport to meet him, he was not there. I waited for 3 hours. I checked the departure boards. Our flight was listed. I stood in the terminal waiting for my son to appear, thinking that maybe he was stuck in traffic or that we had somehow missed each other in this massive airport. But he never came. He never answered my phone. He never sent me a message. He had simply vanished, taken with him my wallet, my credit cards, my phone, and my passport. All I had was my airline ticket and my ticket confirmation printed on a piece of paper in my pocket. I was trapped in Mexico City with no money, no identification, no way to contact anyone. Now, as I stood in the terminal trying to figure out what to do, I realized something that made me feel sick. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was planned. This was calculated. My own son had orchestrated my abandonment in a foreign country for a reason, and I was going to find out what that reason was, even if it took the rest of my life. I managed to find a security guard who spoke English, and I explained my situation to him. He took pity on me and helped me contact the American Embassy. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in a small office with a diplomatic official named Carlos Mendez, who had kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had seen countless Americans in crisis. He helped me file a report about being abandoned by my traveling companion, and he made calls to my bank in Pennsylvania to verify that I was indeed a real person and that I had a legitimate account there. The bank representative I spoke with was a woman named Susan Chun, and her voice went very serious when I explained what had happened. She told me that there had been several unusual transactions on my account over the past few months, and that she wanted to go through them with me carefully. She read me a list of charges that made my stomach turn. $10,000 to a law firm in Pittsburgh called Karstner and Associates. $5,000 to something called Crown Title Company. $3,000 to a company that managed nursing homes. $8,000 to various online casino sites. $15,000 transferred to a bank account in Trevor's name. My hands were shaking as Susan told me about each transaction. This was not just about abandonment. This was about theft. This was about fraud. This was about my own son stealing from me while I was grieving the loss of my wife. The total amount that had been stolen from my account over the past 8 months was more than $47,000. Susan told me that she was reporting this to the bank's fraud department immediately, and that she was also recommending that I file a police report with the federal authorities. She told me that what Trevor had done was a federal crime because it involved interstate wire transfers and the use of identification theft. She told me that I could press charges, that I could potentially pursue civil litigation, that I had legal remedies available to me, but I barely heard her. I was thinking about my house in Ashford. I was thinking about the will that Linda and I had written together when we were young and in love and believed that our son would always take care of us when we were old. I was thinking about the fact that I had retired at 62, which meant that my pension was already reduced. I was thinking about the fact that at my age, working my way back from this financial devastation would be nearly impossible. I was thinking about the money my son had given to a law firm and a title company, and I was thinking about what those kinds of transactions meant. I was thinking about the nursing home fees, and I was understanding, with a clarity that was absolutely devastating, exactly what my son had been planning to do. Carlos Mendez helped me file a police report with the Mexican authorities, and he helped me contact the American Embassy in Washington, D.C. to arrange for emergency travel documents. He gave me a place to stay for the night, a small guest room in the embassy compound, and he brought me food and water and a phone to use to contact people back home. I called Detective Sarah Whitmore at the Ashford Police Department. I told her everything. I told her about the abandoned trip. I told her about the fraudulent charges. I told her about the payments to the nursing home company. I told her about my fears regarding my house and my will and my future. Detective Whitmore listened carefully, and then she told me something that made my blood run cold. She said, "Mr. Kaplan, I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm. Your son Trevor came to the police station yesterday with a lawyer. He filed a petition with the court claiming that you are mentally incompetent to manage your own affairs. He submitted medical evaluations from a psychiatrist claiming that you are experiencing early-onset dementia and that you are a danger to yourself. He has requested emergency guardianship over your person and your assets. A hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I felt like the earth was moving beneath my feet. I felt like I was falling down into an abyss, and there was nothing to hold on to. My son was not just stealing from me. He was trying to have me declared incompetent. He was trying to take control of my house and my pension and my entire life. He was trying to lock me away in a nursing home and make me disappear, so that nobody would ever question what he was doing with my money. I told Detective Whitmore that I was on my way home. I told her that I would be there for the hearing. I told her to contact my doctor and ask him to provide medical records showing that I was mentally competent. I asked her to look into Trevor's financial situation, his debts, his desperate circumstances. I asked her to investigate whether he had committed fraud in obtaining the guardianship petition. That night, I could not sleep. I lay on the small bed in the guest room at the American Embassy, and I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I was going to fight. I was going to come home and face my son and prove that he was the one who was sick, not me. I was going to make sure that everyone in Ashford knew exactly what kind of person Trevor Kepplin really was. And I was going to make sure that he paid for every lie he had told, every penny he had stolen, and every moment he had tried to destroy me. By the time the sun came up over Mexico City, I had transformed from a grieving widower into something harder and more dangerous. I was no longer the kind man who believed in the goodness of people. I was a man on a mission, and nothing was going to stop me from exposing my son and taking back my life. I landed at Pittsburgh International Airport at 7 o'clock in the evening on a Tuesday, wearing the same clothes I had worn to Mexico, carrying nothing except the legal documents that the American Embassy had given me. My heart was racing as I made my way through baggage claim and into the main terminal. I had called Detective Whitmore from the airport, and she was waiting for me with her badge visible and her hand resting on her duty belt. She drove me directly to the courthouse. Even though it was already closed for the day, she showed me the guardianship petition that Trevor had filed, and I saw the lies written in neat legal language on the pages. It claimed that I had experienced several episodes of confusion in recent months, that I had threatened harm to myself, that I was unable to manage my financial affairs or make decisions regarding my own care. It was all lies, every single word of it. The petition included a medical evaluation from a psychiatrist named Dr. Malcolm Brennan, a man I had never met and never seen in my life. According to the document, Dr. Brennan had conducted an extensive psychological evaluation and had concluded that I was experiencing early-stage cognitive decline consistent with Alzheimer's disease. The evaluation included specific examples of my supposed confusion and delusion, including claims that I called Trevor and accused him of stealing from me, which supposedly demonstrated paranoid thinking. Detective Whitmore told me that she had already begun investigating Trevor's claims. She had contacted my personal physician, Dr. Raymond Hoffman, who had provided her with my complete medical file. According to my records, I had never shown any signs of cognitive decline. My last physical examination had been completely normal. I had no history of psychiatric treatment or medication. I was, by all medical standards, a healthy and mentally competent 67-year-old man. She had also looked into Dr. Brennan's background, and she had discovered something very interesting. Dr. Brennan's office was located in the same medical building as a law firm called Carstner and Associates, the very same firm that Trevor had paid $10,000 to. Furthermore, Dr. Brennan had a reputation for providing favorable evaluations for guardianship cases, particularly cases that involved elderly patients with significant assets. In short, he was a hired gun, a professional liar willing to provide fraudulent medical documentation in exchange for payment. Detective Whitmore drove me to my house in Ashford at 9 o'clock that night. As we turned onto my street, I saw Trevor's truck parked in my driveway. The lights in my house were on, and I could see shadows moving inside. Trevor was in my home, the home that I had built with Linda, the home where we had raised him, and he was treating it like it was already his. I got out of the truck before Detective Whitmore could say anything. I walked up to my front door, and I used my key to unlock it. When I stepped inside, I found Trevor in my living room packing items into boxes. My television, my stereo system, some paintings that Linda had loved, He looked up from what he was doing, and his face went completely white. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Trevor was 42 years old, and he had always been a handsome man, with the kind of charming smile that had always gotten him out of trouble when he was younger. But now, looking at him in this moment, I saw something else. I saw desperation. I saw the face of a man who had gambled away his marriage, his job, his savings, and was now trying to steal his father's life in a last desperate attempt to save himself from financial ruin. I said nothing. I simply walked over to the boxes that he had packed, and I picked up the television. I held it for a moment, looking at my reflection in the dark screen, and then I set it back down on the floor. I turned to Trevor and I said, "Hello, son. I hear you have been planning some things while I was away. I have something interesting to tell you." Trevor's face flushed red, and he started to back away from me. He said, "Dad, you do not understand. I was trying to help. I was worried about you. You have not been yourself since Mom died." Detective Whitmore stepped through the door behind me, and she held up her badge. She said, "Trevor Keplin, I need you to step away from those boxes and place your hands on top of your head." Trevor's entire body went rigid. He looked at Detective Whitmore, then at me, and then he did something that I had not expected. He ran. He bolted toward the back door of my house, trying to escape through the kitchen. But I was faster than he expected for a man of my age. I was fueled by 3 days of rage and 3 years of grief, and the absolute clarity that comes when you finally understand exactly who your enemy is. I grabbed his arm as he passed me, and I pulled him back. Trevor struggled and fought, but Detective Whitmore was already moving toward us, and within seconds, she had handcuffed him. As she was reading him his rights and preparing to take him to the police station, Trevor looked at me and said, "You cannot prove anything, Dad. My lawyer will destroy you. You are the one who is going to end up in the nursing home, not me." I looked at my son in handcuffs, my son whom I had loved and protected and provided for his entire life, and I said, "I have already proven everything, Trevor. Tomorrow morning, in front of a judge, everyone is going to learn exactly what kind of person you really are. And your lawyer, your fake doctor, your fraudulent guardianship petition, none of it is going to matter anymore." The guardianship hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 9:30, the courtroom was packed with people from Ashford. Word had spread throughout the small town about what had happened, and people were desperate to see this family drama unfold. Detective Whitmore sat behind me, and my lawyer, Ellen Kalski, a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in elder abuse cases, sat beside me at the defense table. Ellen had spent the night preparing her case. She had obtained my complete medical records and had prepared Dr. Raymond Hoffman to testify about my perfect mental and physical health. She had also prepared Detective Whitmore to testify about the fraud she had uncovered in Trevor's guardianship petition. She had arranged for a forensic accountant to present evidence of the $47,000 that Trevor had stolen from me. She had even obtained documentation of Trevor's gambling addiction, including court records from 3 separate times that he had been sued by casinos for unpaid debts. Judge Patricia Morrison entered the courtroom, and everyone stood. She was a stern woman in her 60s who had a reputation for being tough on family crimes and elder abuse. She read through the guardianship petition that Trevor had filed, and her face grew darker with each page. She looked at Trevor, who was sitting at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, a thin man named Richard Herod, who looked like he was already considering how he would explain this disaster to his other clients. Judge Morrison said, "I have reviewed this petition, and I have some serious concerns about the credibility of the medical evaluation that Mr. Keplin provided. I want to hear testimony from both Dr. Malcolm Brennan and Mr. Keplin's personal physician, Dr. Raymond Hoffman. Let's start with Mr. Keplin's physician. Dr. Hoffman testified that he had been my doctor for 23 years. He said that I had never shown any signs of cognitive decline, that my memory was sharp, that my mental faculties were completely intact. He said that the symptoms described in Dr. Brennan's evaluation were completely inconsistent with my actual condition and with the medical records that he maintained. He said that, in his professional opinion, the evaluation was fraudulent. Then Judge Morrison called Dr. Malcolm Brennan to the stand. Detective Whitmore had been working with the prosecutor's office, and they had obtained a warrant to search Dr. Brennan's office. They had found evidence of a long-standing relationship between Dr. Brennan and the law firm Carstner and Associates. They had found emails in which Dr. Brennan discussed specific cases and specific payments for favorable evaluations. They had found a pattern of fraudulent medical documentation going back at least 3 years. When confronted with this evidence, Dr. Brennan's lawyer advised him to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Dr. Brennan refused to answer any questions. Judge Morrison looked at him with absolute contempt, and she said, "Dr. Brennan, I am suspending your medical license effective immediately pending a full investigation by the State Medical Board. You will be hearing from federal prosecutors regarding wire fraud and other potential charges." Then Judge Morrison turned to the forensic accountant, who presented her detailed analysis of the theft that Trevor had committed. The accountant showed the judge the specific transactions, the law firm payments, the nursing home deposits, the casino transfers, the direct deposits to Trevor's personal bank account. The total amount was now over $51,000, as more fraudulent charges have been discovered since I had filed my report with the bank. Judge Morrison turned to Trevor and said, "Mr. Keplin, I understand that you are also facing criminal charges related to identity theft and elder abuse, so I will not ask you to testify at this time. However, I want to make something very clear. This guardianship petition is not only denied, but I am referring the matter to the prosecutor's office for criminal prosecution of you and your attorney for fraud and conspiracy." Richard Harrod's face went pale. He looked at Trevor and said something under his breath that I could not hear. Trevor looked like he might be sick. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Judge Morrison banged her gavel and said, "I am also ordering that all of Mr. Keplin's accounts be immediately frozen pending investigation, and I am recommending that he pursue civil litigation against his son to recover the full amount of the stolen funds." As the bailiff led Trevor out of the courtroom, he looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw the little boy that he had been, the son that I had loved and protected. But that moment passed quickly, and he looked away, and I understood that the man my son had become was a stranger to me. After the hearing concluded, I drove back to my house in Ashford alone. The sun was setting over the small town, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and I felt a strange emptiness inside my chest. The victory I had achieved in the courtroom did not feel like a victory. It felt like a defeat. It felt like the loss of something that I could never get back. I stood in my living room, and I looked at the boxes that Trevor had packed, filled with my belongings and my memories. I thought about Linda, and I wondered what she would think if she could see what had become of our son. I thought about the early years of Trevor's life, when he was a small boy and he believed that his father could protect him from anything and everything that was bad in the world. I was so lost in these thoughts that I did not hear the car pull into my driveway. I did not hear the footsteps on my front porch. I did not hear the key turning in my front door lock. I only became aware that I was no longer alone when I heard a voice behind me say, "Oh, you're back. I was hoping you would be here." I turned around, and I saw a woman standing in my doorway. She was tall, with dark hair and intelligent eyes, and she was dressed in an expensive business suit. For a moment, I had no idea who she was. But then she smiled, and the pieces of a puzzle that I had not even known was being constructed suddenly came together in my mind. "Hello, Father," she said. "My name is Rebecca Keplin Morrison. I am your daughter, and I think it is time that we had a conversation about what really happened to your wife." I stood in my living room staring at this woman, this stranger who claimed to be my daughter, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. My mind raced back through my entire life, looking for any evidence that I had another child, any memory of pregnancy or an adoption, or any indication that Linda and I had ever brought another child into our family. I found nothing. I said, "I do not have a daughter. I only have a son. Trevor, who are you? How did you get into my house?" The woman smiled sadly, and she said, "I am Rebecca. I am the daughter that you and Linda had before you had Trevor. I was adopted at birth, and my adoptive parents raised me in Pittsburgh. But I have always known that I was adopted, and I have always wanted to find my biological parents." She walked into my living room and sat down on the couch, the same couch where Linda and I had spent 30 years watching television together, the the same couch where I had held her hand when she was dying from cancer. Rebecca said, I found the adoption records about 5 years ago. I found your names and Linda's name, and I reached out to a private investigator to help me locate you. The investigator found you living here in Ashford. I wanted to contact you, but I was afraid. I was afraid that you would reject me, that you would not want to know me. I sat down in Linda's favorite chair, the chair that she had sat in on countless evenings, and I tried to process what this woman was telling me. I said, my wife never told me about another child. We were married for 41 years, and she never once mentioned that we had put a child up for adoption before we had Trevor. I do not understand how this is possible. Rebecca said, Linda gave me up for adoption before you were even married. She was 16 years old, and she was pregnant, and her parents insisted that she give me up for adoption. She never told you because she was ashamed, and because her parents made her promise never to speak of it again. But before she died, she reached out to the adoption agency and left a letter for me. In that letter, she told me about you. She told me that you were a good man, and that you deserved to know that I existed. Rebecca stood up and walked over to me. She pulled an envelope from her purse and handed it to me. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a letter written in Linda's handwriting, a letter that I had never seen before, a letter that explained everything. The letter said, if you are reading this, then I am gone from this world, and Rebecca has found you. I want you to know that you were the love of my life, and I have never regretted our marriage or our life together. But I have always carried the weight of giving you up, Rebecca. I have always wondered about you and hoped that you were happy and loved. I hope that now, when you've found Maurice, he will welcome you into his life and into his heart the way that I always wanted to. You are his daughter, even though he does not know it yet, and that means something very important. I read that letter 3 times, and I wept each time. Linda had carried the secret for our entire marriage. She had borne the weight of this alone, never telling me, never asking me for support or understanding. I realized that I had been married to a woman who had kept a part of herself hidden from me for 41 years, and now that I would never be able to talk to her about it, never be able to comfort her about it, never be able to tell her that I would have loved Rebecca if only she had trusted me enough to tell me. Rebecca said, I have been watching your family for a long time, Maurice. I have watched Trevor and what he has been doing. I have been investigating him. I hired private investigators to follow him to the casinos, to document his gambling addiction, to trace his financial crimes. I have been building a case against him because I wanted to protect you. I wanted to protect the father that I never had, the father that I have always wanted to know. I looked at Rebecca, and I understood that she was not just my daughter. She was also an angel sent by Linda, a way for my wife to protect me even from beyond the grave. I said, I do not know you, Rebecca. I do not have any memories of you, but you are still my daughter. You are still my child. And if you are willing, I would like the chance to know you. Rebecca smiled and tears streamed down her face, and she said, that is all I have ever wanted, Father. That is all I have ever wanted. But then Rebecca's expression changed. She looked at her phone, and her face went serious. She said, we have a problem. Trevor has escaped police custody. He was released on bail this afternoon, and his GPS tracking device was disabled about an hour ago. The police do not know where he is. I knew exactly where Trevor would go. He would go to my house. He had already tried to steal from me twice, and he had failed both times. But he would try again because he was desperate and angry, and he had nothing left to lose. Rebecca called Detective Whitmore and told her where we thought Trevor would go. And then we waited. We did not have to wait long. At 11 o'clock that night, Trevor's truck pulled into my driveway. He got out of the truck, and he was carrying a gasoline can and a lighter. He was going to burn down my house. He was going to destroy everything that I had built, everything that reminded me of Linda, everything that I loved, simply because he could not have it for himself. Rebecca and I watched from the upstairs bedroom window as Trevor poured gasoline around the perimeter of my house. He was muttering to himself, angry and frantic, and I realized that my son was completely unhinged. He was not the man I had known. He was not the boy I had raised. He was a monster created by addiction and desperation, and the absolute conviction that the world owed him something that it had never promised to give him. I came downstairs and I opened the front door. Trevor looked at me, surprised to see me there, and he raised a lighter in his hand. He said, "If I cannot have the house, Father, then nobody can have it. You have stolen enough from me. You have held me back my entire life. You made me into this. You made me desperate." I walked toward him slowly, and I said, "I made you? Trevor, everything you have done to yourself. I gave you love and support and money and opportunity. I gave you everything that a father is supposed to give his son, and you repaid that love by betraying me in the worst way possible. But I am not going to let you destroy this house. This is where your mother and I built our life. This is where your memories live, and I will not let you erase that." Trevor stepped back from me, and he said, "You do not understand, Dad. I am drowning. I owe money to people who are very dangerous. I owe the casinos more than $100,000. I have loan sharks showing up at my door. I have creditors calling me every single day. If I do not get that money, they are going to hurt me. They are going to kill me." I saw the fear in my son's eyes, and I saw the pain, and I understood that Trevor was not evil so much as he was sick. He was sick with addiction, and addiction is a disease that destroys everything it touches. I said, "We can get you help, Trevor. We can find you a program, a therapist, something that will help you deal with your addiction. But burning down the house is not going to fix anything. It is only going to make everything worse." Police lights appeared at the end of my street, and I knew that Detective Whitmore was only minutes away. Trevor saw the lights too, and he looked at the lighter in his hand, and he looked at the gasoline on the ground, and then he looked at me. He said, "I am sorry, Dad. I am sorry for everything. I wish I could be the son that you wanted me to be. I wish I could be the man that you raised me to be. But I am not. I am broken." Trevor dropped the lighter, and it fell to the ground without igniting. He sat down on the steps of my house, and he started to cry, big wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep inside him. I sat down beside him, and I did something that I had not thought I would ever do again. I put my arm around my son, and I held him while he wept. 6 months later, Trevor was in a federal prison in Pennsylvania serving a 15-year sentence for identity theft, wire fraud, and elder abuse. He had also been charged with attempted arson, but he had agreed to a plea deal that included his participation in a rehabilitation program for gambling addiction. The money that he had stolen from me had been recovered through the seizure of his assets and the cooperation of the banks that had processed his fraudulent transactions. I stood in my living room of my house in Ashford, preparing for a dinner that would change the trajectory of my life. I had invited Rebecca to come to the house so that I could introduce her to some of the people from the town who had supported me through this ordeal. Detective Whitmore was coming, and Ellen Kowalski, my lawyer, and Dr. Hoffman, my physician. I wanted these people to meet my daughter, and I wanted Rebecca to understand that I had a community, a family of sorts, made up of people who care about me and who were invested in my well-being. I had also done something else. I had changed my will. I had made Rebecca my primary heir, giving her the house and my remaining assets after my death. I had made substantial donations to addiction recovery programs and elder abuse prevention organizations in Linda's name. I had used some of the recovered money to help other victims of elder abuse, and I had even started volunteering with a group that helped seniors navigate the legal system and protect themselves from exploitation. Life had taken on a new meaning for me. I was no longer simply a retired man grieving the loss of his wife. I was a man with a purpose. I was a man with a daughter. I was a man who had survived one of the worst betrayals imaginable and had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. There was a knock on my door at 6 o'clock in the evening, and I opened it expecting to see Rebecca. Instead, I found a man standing on my porch that I had not seen in almost 3 years. He was thin and worn, and his eyes were filled with pain and regret. It was Trevor. He was in a prison work release program, and he had been given permission to visit me under police supervision once a month. Detective Whitmore was waiting in her car in the driveway, watching to make sure that the visit remained safe and that Trevor did not attempt to flee. "Hello, Dad," Trevor said quietly. "I hope I am not intruding. I know this is unexpected. I wanted to tell you that I am sorry. I have been attending meetings every single day in prison. I have been working through the 12 steps. I have been trying to understand why I did what I did and what I need to do to become a better person. I do not expect your forgiveness. I do not expect anything from you anymore. I just wanted you to know that I am trying. I looked at my son, and I saw a man who was attempting to rebuild himself from the ashes of his own destruction. I did not know if he would succeed. I did not know if Trevor would ever be the man that I wanted him to be. But I knew that he was trying, and that meant something. I stepped aside and I said, "Come in, Trevor. Your sister Rebecca is coming for dinner. I would like for you to meet her." Trevor's face went completely white. He said, "Sister? What are you talking about, Dad?" I told him the entire story of Rebecca, of the daughter that Linda and I had given up for adoption 42 years ago, of the letter that Linda had left, of the daughter who had protected me and helped me expose Trevor's crimes. As I finished the story, there was another knock on the door. I opened it, and there stood Rebecca, dressed beautifully in a blue dress that reminded me of the color that Linda used to love wearing. She stepped into my house, and she looked at Trevor sitting on my couch, and I watched as she took in the sight of her brother for the very first time. I said, "Rebecca, this is Trevor. Trevor, this is your sister Rebecca." For a long moment, nobody said anything. Trevor stared at Rebecca like he was looking at a ghost, like he was trying to understand how this woman had materialized in his father's living room. Rebecca looked at her brother with a mixture of curiosity and caution, the look of a woman who had spent months investigating this man, and who understood both his crimes and his suffering. Rebecca said, "Hello, Trevor. I know who you are. I have known for a very long time. I hired the investigators who followed you to the casinos. I documented your gambling addiction. I helped my father protect himself from your crimes." Trevor's face flushed with shame, and he said, "So you are the one who turned me in. You are the reason I am in prison." Rebecca said, "No, you are the reason you are in prison. You made the choices. You committed the crimes. I simply made sure that my father was protected and that justice was served." I watched as my two children, brought together by circumstance of betrayal and the unconditional love of a woman who was no longer alive to see it, began to talk. They did not embrace. They did not suddenly become close. But they began a conversation that would, over time, develop into something that resembled understanding. They began to tell each other their stories. Trevor told Rebecca about his gambling addiction, about the spiral of debt and desperation that had consumed him. Rebecca told Trevor about her life, about growing up in Pittsburgh, about the journey that had led her to find our family. Detective Whitmore remained in the driveway, making sure that Trevor did not attempt to escape. But I could see through the window that she was no longer watching with suspicion. She was watching with compassion, understanding that she was witnessing something profound and meaningful, a moment of human connection that transcended crime and punishment and betrayal. As the evening progressed, Detective Whitmore came inside, and Ellen Kowalski arrived, and Dr. Hoffman arrived, and we all sat together in my dining room eating the dinner that I had prepared. We sat around a table that Linda and I had bought together 40 years ago, and we shared a meal and stories and laughter and tears. Trevor told us that he had 3 months left in his work release program before he would return to prison to serve out the remainder of his sentence. He told us that he was planning to enter a specialized addiction treatment program once his prison sentence was completed. He told us that he had no expectations of rebuilding his life as it had been, but that he hoped to build a new life, a smaller life, a simpler life built on honesty and responsibility and genuine connection with other people. Rebecca told us that she had decided to take a leave of absence from her job to spend time in Ashford. She told us that she wanted to help her father with the house and with the community work that he had begun. She told us that she wanted to build a relationship with her father and with her brother, to transform the tragedy and betrayal of the past months into something meaningful and redemptive. I looked around that table at all these people, and I thought about Linda. I thought about the secret that she had carried for 41 years, the daughter that she had given up at 16 and had never stopped loving. I thought about how that secret had protected me, how Rebecca's investigation had saved me from Trevor's schemes, how my wife's love extended beyond her death to protect her family and ensure that justice was served. I stood up and I raised my glass. I said, I want to thank everyone here for standing by me during the most difficult period of my life. I want to thank my friend Detective Whitmore for her diligent investigation and her unwavering commitment to justice. I want to thank Ellen Kowalski for being my advocate and my guide through the legal system. I want to thank Dr. Hoffman for his professional integrity and for providing the evidence that exposed the fraud that was committed against me. And I want to thank my daughter Rebecca for protecting me and for bringing herself into my life. I paused and I looked at Trevor. I said, and I want to thank my son for finally beginning the long journey toward understanding and redemption. I do not know what our relationship will look like in the future. I do not know if we will ever be close again. But I know that I love you, Trevor, and I know that you are capable of change and growth. I know that you are suffering for the choices that you have made, and I believe that suffering, if it is born with honesty and humility, can lead to transformation. Trevor's face was streaked with tears, and he said, I do not deserve your love, Dad. I do not deserve your forgiveness. I said, forgiveness is not something that is deserved. Trevor, it is something that is given freely without condition. I forgive you, not because what you did was acceptable. It was not, but because I am your father, and I choose to believe that even in your darkest moment, you are still capable of being a better man. That night, after Detective Whitmore had picked up Trevor and taken him back to the prison work-release facility, after Ellen and Dr. Hoffman had gone home, Rebecca and I sat in the living room of my house in Ashford, and we talked until the sun came up. I told her stories about Linda, stories about her mother that she had never heard before. I told her about Linda's dreams and her fears and her tremendous capacity for love. I told her about the life that Linda and I had built together, the home that we had created, the family that we had formed. Rebecca told me stories about her adoptive parents, about the good life they had given her, about the love and support that had surrounded her even as she had searched for her biological family. She told me that she did not feel torn between two families, but rather that she felt blessed to have two sets of people who loved her and who had contributed to making her the woman that she had become. As dawn broke over Ashford, I realized something profound. The abandonment that I had experienced at the airport in Mexico City, the betrayal that Trevor had orchestrated, the discovery of Rebecca, the exposure of the fraud, the trial and conviction, all of it had served a purpose. All of it had been leading me toward this moment, toward the understanding that my life was not over simply because my wife had died. My life was not over simply because my son had betrayed me. My life was beginning again in a new form, with new people, with new meaning. I had been abandoned in a foreign country, without money or documents, but I had not remained abandoned. I had found my way home. I had found my way back to love and connection and purpose. I had discovered that the human spirit is far more resilient than we can ever imagine, and that even after experiencing the deepest betrayal, we are capable of rebuilding, of forgiving, of moving forward. In the months that followed, Trevor completed his work release program and returned to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence. But he continued to write letters to me, letters in which he shared his progress in addiction treatment, his growing understanding of the damage he had caused, his slow and difficult journey toward becoming a better man. Whether he would succeed in this journey remained uncertain, but what was certain was that he was trying, and that effort meant something significant. Rebecca remained in Ashford. She became part of the community. She helped me with the house and with the volunteer work I had begun. She started a support group for other seniors who had been victims of elder abuse and financial exploitation. She and I took trips together to places that Linda had always wanted to visit. We built a relationship that had nothing to do with the past and everything to do with the present moment and the future that we were creating together. I often stood in my living room and looked at the photograph of Linda that sat on the mantel, and I thought about how she had protected me even from beyond death. I thought about the love that she had carried in her heart for Rebecca all those years, the love that had motivated her to leave a letter explaining everything. I thought about how the secret that she had kept for so long had ultimately become the key to my salvation. 1 year after I had been abandoned at the airport in Mexico City, I received a phone call from the Federal Bureau of Prisons informing me that Trevor had attempted to take his own life in his prison cell. He had survived, but he was severely injured and had been transferred to a hospital prison facility for psychiatric evaluation and treatment. I drove to the hospital immediately, and I sat beside my son's hospital bed while he recovered. When Trevor finally regained consciousness, he looked at me and he said, "I am sorry, Dad. I am sorry for everything. I tried to escape the pain, but I could not do it. I am still here. I still exist. And I do not know what to do with that." I took his hand and I said, "You exist because you're supposed to exist. You have a purpose, even if you cannot see it right now. You have a chance to transform yourself, to use your experience and your suffering to help other people who are struggling with addiction. That is your purpose, Trevor. That is your redemption." Trevor looked at me with tears streaming down his face, and he squeezed my hand gently. He said, "I love you, Dad. I have always loved you, even when I was doing terrible things. I hope you know that." I said, "I know, son. I have always known. That is why I never gave up on you and why I never will." This is the story of Maurice Keplin, the man who was abandoned at an airport in a foreign country without money or documents. This is the story of a man who was betrayed by his only son, who discovered a daughter he never knew he had, who exposed crimes and corruption and fraud. This is the story of a man who learned that forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, that family is not always defined by blood alone, and that even in the darkest moments of our lives, there is always the possibility of redemption and transformation. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you love, if you have ever felt abandoned and hopeless, if you have ever wondered whether there is a way forward from the depths of despair, then I hope my story has shown you that there is always a way. There is always hope. There is always the possibility of starting again. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of overcoming adversity and finding strength in the face of betrayal. Comment below and tell me your own story of resilience and redemption. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone, that their pain has meaning, and that their future can be better than their past. Thank you for watching, and remember, every ending is just the beginning of a new story waiting to be told.